Courageous Conversations. I'm your host, John Robinson Jr. Hope you're well. I see the participants coming in, so we'll wait for that to come in a little bit. But for the past few weeks, we have been taking a stand against racism and really becoming activists for anti-racism. And the conversation has been going great, but we just want to make sure that we keep the conversation going. It's going to be a 30-minute webinar, lunch and learn, so you bring your lunch. And then we always encourage for you to join the conversation. So you'll see a Q&A bubble there. Go ahead and type in your questions. I'll try and get those in throughout the duration of the 30 minutes that we are together. Today, we'll be talking about companies taking a stand against racism. And I have an awesome guest with me today. Her name is Tomi. Tomi credits her nose to the grindstone mentality to her upbringing in Lagos. Since moving to Canada, she's pursued other interests in education, technology, and entrepreneurship. Speaking of which, some of those interests led her to launch MFMG Cosmetics. It has quite the audience. You can check out her Instagram page. MFG Cosmetics has 156,000 followers, so great work there. It's a leading direct-to-consumer beauty brand tailored to multi-ethnic communities. In addition to her e-commerce business, she also manages Ontario operations at Lighthouse Labs, a leading software and inclusion in tech and entrepreneurship communities. It has led to recognition by the Globe and Mail, the New York Times, BuzzFeed, Flair, Glamour, and more as a young leader in the Toronto tech ecosystem. So I gotta say, welcome, Tomi.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining us today. How you doing?
Good to be here.
Okay, cool. Well, you know what, Tomi, let's jump into it. Today we're chatting about companies taking a stand against racism. So over the past couple of weeks since the murder of George Floyd, this uprising, this racial movement of equality has been taking full force, full steam. Companies like Google have been stepping up, stepping forward, donating money. Google donated 12 million, Facebook 10 million, Amazon 10 million. But it doesn't stop there. All the big box companies, Walmart, Target, Home Depot have been putting out statements and money. In terms of retail, H&M, Levi's, Lululemon, Nike, food, you got McDonald's, Wendy's, Coca-Cola, so, and more and more and more. But what I was curious as to how do you feel about corporations making these statements on anti-racism, showing their solidarity, and just being a part of the Black Lives Matter movement?
Well, first of all, thanks for the introduction. And like you said, let's, get right into things and talk about the Black Lives Matter movement and how corporations have kind of hopped on board of that. First thing is the Black Lives Matter movement isn't new. In terms of that, if we go with a very specific hashtag and movement and statement, it kind of picked up steam in 2013 after the death of Eric Garner. And what has been interesting to see in 2020 is Black Lives Matter was seen and perceived to be very militant, I feel, back then. It was really seen as a concern of exclusively Black people, something that was happening within our community and something for us to deal with. I remember getting actually a lot of resistance from friends, from others when that statement was shared, because it was definitely perceived as a militant stance, almost the same way like I would say Black Panthers at some time were perceived. So it was very interesting to see that change in 2020. And to be honest, I welcome that change. Because I do believe what's happening is a human rights issue, and it's not the exclusive onus of Black people to take on. So for me, I am happy to see that, Black Lives Matter is no longer seen as a controversial statement for the most part, with the number of companies jumping on board. And of course, the other half of that is if as a company, which we've seen happen live. If you're making that statement, though, there are actions that should be backing that up. Like we've seen kind of backlash from existing Black employees at companies, even media companies like Refinery 29, BuzzFeed. Some of their ex-staff, current staff have taken to social media to say, oh, if Black Lives Matter, why is it that I'm underpaid compared to my peers? Why is it that when I brought up issues in the workplace, like they were dismissed and they were seen as, me asking for too much? So those are the consequences of making that statement, is you also have to back it up with actions.
Yeah, for sure. And the reason why it was controversial is because some people perceive Black Lives Matter as only Black Lives Matter, and that is not what we're saying. Black Lives Matter is very much acknowledging just racial injustices and looking for equality. So you mentioned, actions, and I thought that was super important. One of the things, there's sort of this call-out culture happening today, where companies are putting up statements and then also showing what they could do in terms of a solution. I'm just looking up Levi's just put out a statement, and they're saying on the surface, they make up a diverse company. 57% of the company is women, awesome. Just 40% of their employees are white, that's not a bad thing. But they say when you look at it closer and you go, the more employees that are non-managers, sort of on the front line, so to speak, are the ones that make up a diverse population. As you go further up, it gets more and more white. They say less than 2% of our executive level is Black. We have no Black employees on the global leadership team and no Black board members at all. So I was curious, do you feel like more companies should sort of call themselves out and reveal the racial makeup of their staff?
I think that's a great thing, because the concept of diversity and inclusion and making that an important part of a company's direction isn't new. There are a lot of studies that have come out showing that having a diverse group, prevents groupthink. And it has been something that slowly, there were, more conversations about lack of women in C-suite, lack of, Black people in the C-suite position. But what is happening with both the racial and health pandemic, I think it's accelerating a lot of different concepts that were already starting, if that makes sense. So if you look at remote work, for example, like that conversation was growing here and there, but with everything going on, it's been accelerated. And that's exactly what is happening with the diversity and inclusion conversation as well, is there's no longer like that time to make smaller strides. You have to, if you're gonna say, you're focused on diversity and inclusion, you should show your numbers. So to me, I think it's actually a great thing. Like you were talking earlier before we launched the session today, there was this movement called Pull Up or Shut Up that was kind of a play on Rihanna at a NAACP speech where she said, Black people shouldn't be the only ones. Sorry?
Sharon Shooter.
Yes, Sharon Shooter started it, but the name, the terminology "pull up or shut up" is derived from a speech that Rihanna gave at an NAACP award, where she said, it was a great speech. She's like, because to her point, what Rihanna was expressing is it shouldn't be the onus of a minority group alone to solve a problem that it affects everyone. And ultimately, it takes allies as well to resolve the problem of racism. It shouldn't be just, Black people have been fighting for, since the civil rights movement, since before that. So it takes the full participation of everyone to move this forward. So for me, I was happy to see the Pull Up or Shut Up movement, seeing companies, because to her point, and I actually shared this on my LinkedIn as well. Like if you're a company saying, okay, I see now this is a great PR opportunity for us to show what we stand for. We're going to say Black Lives Matter. Well, what is the makeup of your executive team? What is the makeup of your board of directors? What is the makeup of your staff? And I think these numbers are important because we are, especially in a time where customers want to put their money, there's so much choice. They want to put their money into ethical companies, sustainable companies, and also companies that care about human rights. So I'm happy to see the numbers and see the movement. especially being in the beauty space and seeing kind of a lot of the initial number call out was happening in beauty was very motivating to me, because I was very surprised to see some companies that I've never put out foundation like as dark as my shade then saying Black Lives Matter. I was like, your own product selection doesn't even indicate that. Clearly the message you sent to your customers for 100+ years is that those customers are not important. And now you want to put out and benefit from a PR statement that says Black Lives Matter. So I was very happy to see that sentiment come from my peers in the industry, because it was really important to show that discrepancy in between what companies are saying and what they're actually offering.
Yeah, for sure. And you mentioned the civil rights movement, and part of our conversation earlier was that not every Black person is a freedom fighter. What happens, and you and I could attest to this, you have these large companies with a small Black population, and they ask you, you know, what do you think we should do to fix it? It kind of reminds me, 3 weeks ago, I just had a 20-minute talk, and I said, it's not up to Black people to fix bias and discrimination created by non-Black leaders. So what's sort of your message to the Black people that are sort of on the front line, but they are asked to make this big statement or change company culture?
That's actually quite a tough question, because it varies depending on, you know, sometimes what you're feeling that day. Like, we're dealing, like I said earlier, not just with a global health pandemic, but with, you know, confronting racial injustice and microaggressions and discrimination in the workplace. It is a lot. So I can't prescribe to a Black professional, here's the one thing to do, because even myself, I've been in that position where it's like, hey, we're starting this diversity committee, do you want to join? And it takes me a moment to think about, you know, the emotional labor, you know, involved with that as well. For many professionals, you know, they just want to go to work and do their job, but it gets complicated when it's like, okay, maybe you're the only person of color and everyone's looking to you like, okay, we're about to do this thing. Are you going to be involved? So the best thing I could say is, you know, you have to also like protect your peace. There is nothing wrong if you're in an organization and you decide to express your solidarity in the movement in different ways. Like, some people decide to go and join the protest, but at work, maybe they're taking a reserved stance. It really depends on where they're at that moment, to be quite frank. And what I will say, and the advice I'm always giving company when I'm in a position where I'm approached like, oh, you know, I've gotten asked this question, for example, where it's like at the particular company, they were having a lot of turnover of Black employees. And the question was posed to me in terms of what do we do? And in my mind, I was like, I already know that I'm underpaid compared to all the other people on the team. I'm not gonna, in that position, I was like, I'm not gonna do the extra work for you. My advice was, why don't you hire a diversity and inclusion professional that actually has experience in this field, and not put that on the, you know, the only Black employee in the organization. So that would be that advice is more for the actual company itself. It's like, you also, if you're going to use that hashtag, if you're going to join the movement, the onus is on you to do that research, to pay for the right experts. And that's another thing. It's just wanting a lot of free work. Like, your Black employees shouldn't be doing free, they already work for you and can be like extra, you know, free labor because of the color of their skin. By default, then they should be leading the diversity initiative. Like, invest the time, the energy to actually, you know, want to change the results and streamline what, you know, I like the hiring conversation is coming out specifically because it's a very specific objective that can be looked at. And it prevents all the, you know, we stand with you, we care, but it's like, okay, if you care, who is on the board, who is on the team, who are you hiring? It's straight to the point.
I'm so glad that you said that, especially when it comes to we already work and now it's so multi-layered. We also got to, there's not a lot of room for error when we're working. We got to make sure that we shine being underrepresented because we're thinking, you know, the exponential influence that we may have on them hiring others. And then, you know, combined to the trauma and the mental health that we have to deal with. So it's super important that a company invest the time, bring in a diversity, inclusion, and belonging expert. So thank you for sharing that. Now, when it comes to just every day in the workforce, you mentioned hiring. What do you think would be sort of like a good way to call out when you see bias and discrimination or even racism? What's a good way, whether it be in the context of hiring or just in the context of stupid jokes or stupid stereotypes on the floor?
I think first things first, something I haven't said is for everyone, whether you're Black, whether you're a different race, racism conversations are uncomfortable, period, for most people. Even if you're the person where like you have a microaggression that has occurred like against you, something's being said about you, no one wants to have that happen, which is always like interesting to me when it does come up in organizations. Maybe the person is not believed or something. It's actually it's eerily similar to the way like sexual harassment or sexual misconduct at work sometimes, in terms of the tone it takes. Is always like, oh, they're overreacting. A lot of times it takes a lot of energy from that person to even bring up the situation to begin with, because no one wants that to happen. No one actually enjoys that at work. No one enjoys that. It is not a good experience to have happen. So the first thing I would say is for companies, when those situations happen and Black employees bring it up, like believe them and give them that benefit of it's already taking them, I believe, some emotional energy to come to bring up this situation. So we definitely shouldn't be, belittled. And I would say to the Black professional, if let's say something happens and you didn't happen to speak up, don't beat yourself up about it, because that's happened to me where maybe there was an incident and I was like, oh, I didn't say something, and like I was considering that to be a negative thing. Because like I said earlier, the way you react, we're all different. The way you react when you decide to, speak up for certain issues, it really is going to be different. But definitely speaking up can, help to make changes. But I'm definitely not going to criticize the professional that decides that in that situation they're not. What I can advise though is definitely having a group of like-minded individuals to support you. That helps a lot. Like, don't go through it alone. Have people that you can share information with. Have people that might be going through similar things. Say for me, I'm part of a lot of groups of other Black professionals or Black professional women. And a lot of times when I'm questioning something and wondering if I should have said something, a lot of times when I present that situation to my group, they're able to say, okay, yes, this is definitely something that you need to address. And here's how, you can address it. And, sometimes I've had my friends edit my text because I was in the moment. I was just like, oh, this is so crazy. I cannot believe this happened. And my group was able to like, okay, like this is how I think you should address the situation. So what I would say, as opposed to, thinking, how from to the person that it happens to, definitely having a group of like-minded individuals, having a support group in a sense it's very beneficial to your career in general when you have, friends in similar situations or workspaces to help you work through things. So as opposed to kind of like a mentorship support, is more of like a peer-to-peer support, and that helps a lot. And then when you do decide to speak up at work, what I'll say to the company is, again, don't dismiss people's concerns, like hear them out, listen to them, and look to resolve the situation.
Love it. So what I'm hearing for our audience, in case they have questions, of course, yeah, just throw your questions in the Q&A. But have a support group that you could talk to, confide in, being able to bounce ideas, maybe have them edit your text as well. But I totally agree with you when it comes to don't beat yourself up over it either. Because I've definitely been in that situation where I heard something go awry and not really cool, but I didn't step in the moment because I didn't want to come across as aggressive. I didn't want to be that guy. So some of the things that after reflecting and thinking about it, things that can be done is, even after the moment, even a short email saying, as your friend, I think it's important that we just talk about what was said and why it's inappropriate. And then what you could also do is just attack, even if you don't even have that voice, to the Black professional. You can say, here's an article that taught me a lot. Maybe I could share it with you. Just simple things like that. But it is not always comfortable. So thank you for sharing that, Tomi. And then I guess a lot of the people in our audience they hear us, they're glad to learn. And some people have just frankly asked us, what can be more solution-oriented conversation, right? So in your opinion, in your professional experience, what would sort of be like the ideal corporate culture for a non-racist working environment?
That's a great question, because I'm like,
How do we create a racist-free corporation from top to bottom, and so that it's just not, so there's just weeds out the systemic racism as much as.
Yeah, like overall, I think with everything going on, it's a multi-pronged approach. There isn't going to be there isn't a one. If there was a one size solution fits all, we would have, found it by now. It's definitely a multi-pronged approach where, at least what I'm seeing in the industry is, the start of, the numbers. Let's start with, where is the organization at? Well, we're making the statement, what is our workforce composition made of? I find that being a great place to start, and that being like a tangible solution to start with. Of course, when you actually hire these people, that's why it's always, diversity and inclusion, because just having the number and, we've hit our quota, as we know, is not usually sustainable, because then you have employees, the high employee turnover, and people leave because they're not actually, part of, they don't feel included. And to your point earlier, when they come in and they're the only Black person there, it's like they have to represent, or someone like me who's occupying intersectional space. I feel, and if you're in a space like tech, sometimes it's like you're representing, women, you feel like you're representing your entire race, and like women as well. So that part of making sure that inclusion piece is there is important. So the diversity and inclusion, they go hand in hand, because if the employee comes and there's already like an employee resource group set up, and they have other Black employees, ideally, it's great because they've already have like a built-in social enclave. So that starts that there. That's why the company is showing their numbers, I think, is important. And then the inclusion part is actually, making sure when employees come up with incidents of microaggressions, they're believed, that incidents are addressed directly. I know there are now more startups in the space. Like there's a local startup in Toronto called Crescendo, where they are like an attachment to your Slack. And, if there's something that is a microaggression, or it doesn't align with company values, which ideally should be inclusive of everyone, it actually flags those things. Even at my company, something very simple we did was adding a Slack bot. Like when people say, hey guys, it's just a small thing, it would immediately correct that. It will send a link to an article and be like, hey, did you know this is why hey guys can make other people not feel included in the workplace. So those are just some small things. But I think from a corporation perspective, definitely the workforce composition and then creating an inclusive environment are the things that are important.
Thank you. That was comprehensive. I'm sure there's a lot of takeaways there. So thank you for that. Now, we started this conversation off, and we got about 5 more minutes. But we started this conversation off by saying a lot of companies are taking a stand and putting out statements, even donating money. There is still a handful of companies, many companies, that haven't said anything at all. And part of my talk 3 weeks ago, one of the takeaways was that silence is violence. So I was curious as to what your take is on saying nothing and not making a statement. What do you think that is that a statement in itself?
I think silence is a statement in itself. And it is, I kind of have a different opinion from you in a way, because there are some companies that I would rather not. It's that kind of catch-22 is like, would I even want them to say something if I know it's just a PR stunt? If I know it's just being done to say, hey, we also are here. We see that this is something everyone's doing. Let's put something. So silence in a way is a statement, but I think you can only afford to be silent if you're actually, an inclusive company and doing those things. So silence itself is a statement that you don't really care. But if you are going to speak up, make sure you're ready to step up to the plate. That's the way I would put it. And something I was going to quickly reference to your earlier question when you said what can be done. I think in a lot of times, even in companies where you have the ARG group and you have all those things set up, it can be very obvious to the workforce and the employees there if it doesn't actually come from the leadership, if the people leading the teams don't care about it. Because I have heard in private conversations, like leaders of huge startups in Toronto say things like, oh, when you're starting your company and you're struggling, like who really cares about diversity? It's just this Fortune 500 thing now that everyone's talking about. Like when you're struggling to survive, why would I make that a priority? If the CEO, the leadership team already thinks that, you're kind of dead in the water, really. So that I wanted to make sure I mentioned that, like the leaders have to educate themselves, because that it does, it does permeate the whole organization if they have a mindset of this is just, to tick a box and make sure it's checked. So in terms of your silence question, then what I'm saying is I think silence is an answer in itself, but if you're going to put out a statement, you need to be ready to back that up with action in terms of what you're doing in terms of hiring. And even if you're not hiring, especially when we have hiring freezes, what are the pay discrepancies in the organization? Review them. So something that came up a lot from some employees that spoke out on social media was there were very huge disparities between themselves and their non-Black coworkers.
Absolutely, that's super powerful. And the leadership team does have to educate themselves and make sure that what they're saying is authentic. I do have a question that kind of speaks around it by John Hayden from the audience. And
I know John, actually.
So John Hayden was just sort of referencing your point as to, back in 2013, a lot of companies wouldn't touch Black Lives Matter with a 10-foot pole. It was too radical. So John wants to know, how can we now champion and welcome their messaging about solidarity? Do you think it is possible that corporate solidarity is potentially false and ephemeral? Do we need to continue to dial up the heat or pressure rather than seeming to approve their current disposition?
It's a great question. Like I said, one of the reasons I'm happy about it is because I think overall what I've noticed in terms of like public and private corporations within our capitalist system is it's no longer okay to just, oh, that's a government issue. That's for the people. Oh, what do you think about global warming? Well, we just make money. I think that is the fundamental shift that we're also talking about in addition to this issue, that I believe that as a company, whether you're private or public, mostly, I guess we can say mostly the public ones as shareholders, you can no longer say that your commitment is to your shareholders alone. Like that is changing because we're seeing the impact of the activity of your work on the world, on the environment. So I am glad that more and more companies are starting to realize that you can't just be like, oh, we just generate profit and we just generate return for our shareholders and that's our only obligation. Like you also have an obligation to the world, you also have an obligation to people. So that's what I think that's the overall high level fundamental shift that's happening with different things around the world. And I'm actually happy that companies are now embracing the Black Lives Matter movement because it helps us, the minority group here, in advancing our message to more people. Because if someone that's seeing Nike, supporting this message, it does take the conversation, it takes it further than a Black Lives Matter protest that's organized by Black people alone. does. So that's the benefit of having companies part of this. But to John's point, there is, of course, that risk where it's just used as a PR statement to show where they stand. But I do think that the pros at this point outweighs the cons, because whether you like it or not, this conversation has been visible to everyone. You have to be under a rock almost to not know what's going on. And that's the benefit of corporations being involved. It's a little long-winded, but
I'm sure John is listening right now saying, thank you, Tomi. I'm sure he loved the answer, and the rest of our audience as well. Before I wrap things up, is there any final comments that you wanted to make?
Ooh, final comments. Well, I'm happy we're having this conversation. All I'll say is just believe Black people, believe Black women when they talk about the micro. I can't tell you the number of times where I finally, got the courage to express something about microaggression to someone, and it's seen as, oh, this is just, the liberals are at it again, or, this is, woe is me, pull yourself up by the bootstraps kind of mentality. So that's all I want to say is, like, believe Black people. Like, when in 2013, when people said Black Lives Matter and we're trying to express the intensity of the racial injustice and violence that's happening in the streets of America, not a lot of people they countered that with a separate movement, which I'm not going to give credence to and say the name of that movement, but believe Black people. That's all I have to say.
Thank you so much. Tomi, you are awesome. Thank you so much for joining us today. I completely appreciate your perspective, your experience, and your knowledge. Thank you to the audience for coming by again for today's Courageous Conversation. We'll be doing Courageous Conversation every week. We'll be doing it again next week, Wednesday at 12:30. And be sure to check back in this Friday at 12:30. Andrea, CEO of Talk Boutique, will be interviewing Sandra Elliott. Sandra Elliott is a food addiction counselor. So we'll be chatting more. We'll keep the conversation. Again, thank you, Tomi. And with that, I will say have a good rest of your day, and I'll talk to you soon.
Bye, everyone. Thank you for having me.
Bye, everyone. See you. Goodbye.